Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion. It's not a straightforward review. It's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. Basically, for as little as $1 a month, I do a bonus episode with my weekly roundup of things I saw that week, and we do some interviews on there as well. We just finished covering Loki. We're about to start covering What If, so come join us. We have a lot of fun. I do want to take a moment to thank our top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. I've got a returning guest with me here today. It's a very familiar voice that I think you've heard before. It's Nick.
Hello.
Hi, Nick.
It's me again.
It's you again. We've covered some kind of offbeat stuff like All Dogs Go to Heaven. Our first episode ever was Dark City.
Dark City.
Nick happens to be my husband. If you're a first-time listener,
That's me.
that's his main description.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
End of list. No other redeeming factors.
No agency of his own. No. But Nick is being generous and joining me this episode. This is kind of like a combined. We both really want to talk about this sort of situation. Basically, I don't know if you've noticed, but Amazon Prime has really been advertising these films lately. Nick has bought them on Blu-ray because he's so excited about the fourth one coming out.
So excited.
Without further ado, my guest always picks the movie, so what movie did you want to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk about Evangelion 1.11, and it is the first theatrical film in the Rebuild of Eva series.
Okay. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background? Like what... well, actually, we skipped over you. You didn't introduce yourself.
Over me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about you first?
Well, I'm Nick, and people have heard the podcast before. I've been on a lot of episodes, so they know who I am.
Okay. Well, we'll save your plugs till the end then. Okay. Well, can I brag on you just a little bit?
You can, I don't care.
All right. So, in addition to being my husband, I just think it's funny when people introduce their partners that way. But he also is a cosplayer.
I am.
And he makes props.
I do.
And they're really good.
Thank you.
He's helping me make a Batgirl costume as we speak. So
right now, I'm working on it.
I told him
glue and power tools and paint going all around the room.
I told him he has to help me with that and record at the same time.
Simultaneously.
No, he generously offered to help. But anyway, I can't do it without him, so he's very, very helpful. But today we're going to talk about... So we are, as I've established already about 1,000 times, we're a couple. And also... part of why we got together was through cosplay. Mm-hmm. It's a little embarrassing. That's how nerdy we are. But yeah, how did y'all meet? Well, we did go to college together too. Yeah. But we both started cosplaying, and back in the day, cosplay. Obviously, that word comes from costuming, but it's a Japanese sort of slang term for it, and that's because a lot of it started with anime. Like, I feel like cosplay started with anime. I mean, people dressed up in costumes previous to that, but the concept of cosplay
I feel like
kind of started around then.
Comic conventions had a few people dressing up like superheroes, but I feel like the really, meat and potatoes of it was, anime.
Right. It's like basically at an anime convention, you kind of felt left out if you weren't in costume. And Comic Cons and Star Trek conventions weren't really
There's
like that.
plenty to do outside of costume.
Yeah, like the thought process was, okay, if you're wearing costume, you've taken it a step too far. But in the anime world, it was like, hey, why aren't you wearing your costume kind of thing.
Idiot.
Yeah, I was gonna make a joke, but I won't. I was like, oh, that's too nerdy. But so, that was something that we were both into, and, this was back, I think probably our anime adventure started back in, at least for me, the 90s. Were you watching it that long ago, you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this show, Neon Genesis Evangelion, came out, I think it was 1995, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think it was 94, 95.
Yeah. That's like when a lot of big ones came out. Like, I think Sailor Moon debuted around them, too.
Yeah, I think
but
Cowboy Bebop was like 96. So all the ones most people have heard of, even non-anime fans, probably came out around then.
Yeah. So this one was, I think I saw this, we kind of talked about this last night. I saw Evangelion when I was about, I'm going to say 16. So a couple years after it came out. I remember like renting it on VHS, and then buying individual VHS tapes till I had all of it. When did you see it?
I remember I started watching it probably in junior high, so probably 98 or 99. So I was, I guess, relatively up to date with it. It had been out for about 3 years, so it was still kind of new. I remember having, I think, the first 2 or 3 VHS, and that's when DVDs started coming out.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really wanted the DVDs because it was the same price of the VHS, and you got more episodes, but you didn't get all the VHS cover art.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of me still to this day wants to like find an eBay auction that has all the, I think, like 18 VHS, and just buy it and have it on my shelf.
Yeah, so we kind of got into it probably close to the same time. I remember it had a really big impact on me, and I became kind of like an Insta-obsessed fan.
Is it the first impact?
It was the first impact.
That'll make sense later.
But a lot of people ask where I get my handle from online, and it's from this show. It's been around that long. Rei was one of my favorite characters. She's probably one of my favorite female characters ever. And so, yeah, her name on the show is Rei Ayanami. And so I made myself Ayanami Lisa, like saying Ayanami Rei. Super nerdy, lame. But anyway, so I've been a fan ever since then. It was probably one of the first things that I ever cosplayed to. It looked terrible. I won't get into that. But, after all this time, I just bought another uniform. And I'm almost 40. So if that tells you how much I like this show, I like it a lot.
The old saying, you have to get old, you don't have to grow up.
Exactly. I will never grow up. So let's talk a little bit about this movie. So, basically, Evangelion 1.0 or 1.11, as you said, that's what they call the Blu-ray.
I think that the 1.11 is like the DVD and Blu-ray release, and 1.0 was the original theatrical release.
That was in 2007, right?
Whenever they announced they were going to take the series and turn it into a 4-part movie.
Which sounds, if you watch the show, that sounds like impossible, to be honest. I mean, so a lot of animes are 26 episodes, either 13 or 26. This show is 26.
It's 26.
And although there is some filler, it's just, there's so much ground to cover. At first I was like, how are they going to do that? But then they did it. And actually this movie is pretty good. The biggest difference between 1.0 and 1.1 is they cleaned up a lot of the animation, and I think they added a couple extra scenes.
I don't know exactly which scenes they are, but I do think they made the animation like crisper, more for Blu-ray release.
Yeah, because otherwise it would have looked terrible, to be honest.
Yeah, it was already way upscaled from the original show.
Yeah.
But I think they cleaned it up even more for when they did Blu-ray.
Yeah. But so this first movie especially sort of recaps the series. As you get into the second one, things start to deviate from the show, but this kind of recaps with a few changes.
Yeah, I think this one really is, other than a few changes, like you're saying, it's mostly the first 6 to 8 episodes.
I think it's like 1 through 6 is what I heard. Yeah.
And then the second movie is where it's almost as if like there was like an alternate history.
Yeah.
Where there was a deviation, and that's where the movies take on. So this is very grounded for the old fans to be familiar with everything, and also it kind of brings in new fans to explain what is going to happen later on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I will say, you know, this is not unique to Evangelion in the sense that a lot of times when a show is really successful, there will be a movie that kind of capitalizes on that. Now, the original movies were called Death and Rebirth. No, Death and Rebirth and EOE, right?
Death and Rebirth was essentially a recap of the show, I think, with not director commentary, but it was more like voice over, more explanation, like internal thought type stuff. And then Death and Rebirth was, or no, EOE, End of Evangelion, was supposed to be the true finale. I think it was supposed to take place like during the last 2 or 3 really weird episodes, but I don't know for sure.
It was not received well. People didn't like it, so much so that the creator like became very upset and depressed and like removed himself from even thinking about this. So it took him a long time to kind of get back into, you know, getting this started again. So this is kind of like no, here's the real ending. You know, it's kind of like how there's a lot of different cuts of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. And with anime, like I said, a lot of times they make a movie to sort of capitalize on the popularity of the show, and it not doing well, not being that great is not that uncommon. Like sometimes the movies feel very rushed and like they're trying to cram too much story into them.
Yeah.
And they feel like a little bit, my favorite word, of a cash grab. I know I said my Patreon, I hate saying that, but it does feel that way sometimes. Now there's some notable exceptions. You know, the
Demon Slayer.
Demon Slayer was great. Mugen Train. The Cowboy Bebop movie. Bebop.
Well, I think those two are exceptionally good because they play directly into the plot of the show.
Yeah, they're don't try to recap everything. They don't. A lot of
anime movies, they're not technically even canon. But yeah, the Demon Slayer movie takes place literally right after season 1.
Yeah, kind of leading into season 2.
Leading into season 2, which we don't have yet. And then Cowboy Bebop, the movie, takes place in the middle of the last 2 episodes.
Yeah. So, again, it's uncommon for anime movies to be good. Even more uncommon for them to try to recap the whole show and be good. Like, I remember the Escaflowne movie. It's okay. Like, it looks great. It's okay, though. Like, I feel like you get a better experience if you watch the show. With this, I actually think it's pretty legit. I think it satisfies fans, hardcore fans of the show, but it also, like you said, can bring in new people. But
because they're getting to see what the show was, but also they're getting something new.
Yeah. So it's not like disappointing. So we will give away spoilers. And so I'm going to read the synopsis really quick. Like I said, if you want to go watch this movie, go watch it and then come back. But if you're still here, here's the synopsis of Evangelion 1.11, You Are Not Alone. After the second impact, Tokyo 3 is being attacked by giant creatures called angels that seek to eradicate humankind. The child Shinji's objective is to fight the angels by piloting one of these mysterious Evangelion mecha units.
Yeah, that's what happens.
That's what happens. And it's not what happens.
Yep.
It's both. So I think one thing that really draws a lot of fans to this show is that it kind of appears, you know, like if you watch a trailer, you feel like you have an idea of what it's about.
You think you're kind of getting into like, oh, this is going to be like Gundams or something.
Yeah.
Nope.
But it becomes a lot more complicated quickly. there's a lot of different layers to the show, and what's really going on, it's not like a conspiracy theorist, but promise it's not like QAnon or something. But there really is sort of a conspiracy happening within the show, as well as the things that you're seeing in the trailer. So it becomes this kind of like web that you're trying to entangle the entire show up until the very end. The movie does a pretty good job of still being able to weave in some of those tones. It just kind of speeds things along, which might be easier for some people to digest.
Yeah, no, we've seen all 4 of them. We're just talking about the first one now, but the movies, they do have to trim a lot out. Most of it for the better, but I think there was a few key plot points in the show that didn't make it into the movie that I think would have been really good to leave in. Mm-hmm. But overall, the four-part movie series, I guess you'd say, is really good, and you get the idea of the story.
Yeah, I think that's what's important. A lot of times with these anime movies, as long as you stick to, like, I guess the soul of the project, so to speak, the spirit of what it's trying to convey, and stick with those main themes and high points, I think you'll satisfy fans. It's when they mainly focus on just like the aesthetic of it sometimes in movies where you kind of, it does feel like more of like, hey, let's just put this out there. But this, clearly a lot of thought was put into it, and I think Hideki Anno has really grown, not just as a writer, but as a writer and director. I mean, the story was really good, but he's taken it even further and kind of polished it, and I think even worked in some newer themes that were maybe lightly touched on the previous version, but really take a little bit more front and center stage, like climate change.
Yeah, it was hinted at, but this one, there's definitely a lot more pretty much just out in the open comment about it.
Yeah, I think, a lot of anime, especially like, I feel like the most popular animes tend to draw inspiration from, World War II, basically, from the bombing, because that's like the biggest thing that's happened, right? I mean, honestly.
The first anime ever was Astro Boy.
Yeah.
And his task was to clean up Fallout.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of like Akira.
Yeah.
Draws a lot of themes on that. And this show's no different. Should we tell them a little bit about Second Impact? Do you want to explain it?
First Impact is implied that it's what got rid of the dinosaurs, the first impact.
Yeah.
Second Impact was man-made. Mm-hmm. They essentially found the first organism, Atom, and they tried to revive it, essentially, and that did not go well.
But in the show, you don't know that at first. Yeah. You just know that there was a huge explosion.
Destroyed a lot of the planet and 50% of the population. It wasn't Thanos.
Yeah.
But.
And then, and I think after that, too, is when people started saying, hey, in this year, we're going to start having these creatures come and kill all of us. So we got to, like, prepare for that. And that's the angels. There's a lot of, like, Catholic imagery and influence in the show.
It's a lot of Catholic and, what's the, like, Jewish mysticism?
Like Kabbalah?
Yeah. A lot of that, too.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. But yeah, there's a lot of, like, it's more mystical, than, like, your straightforward Catholicism. Yeah, so some people believe this, some people don't. It happens. And so, there is some research put into creating these Avas to fight them. And so basically, like, the, I guess, organization called NERV that we come to know, mm-hmm. they have an edge on the rest of the world because they're better prepared for these attacks.
They have the technology and the know-how to fight off the angels. They gained this technology not by legal means, but...
Yeah. But it's like, so that's what's happening. Basically, we're being attacked by angels. There's going to be 13 of them in total. And so we have to kind of try to protect what's left over in the world. Like there's almost there's not a lot left. The population has been diminished, and so different countries are trying to, you would hope, work together to fight these creatures, but instead seem to constantly fight each other. You know, the military and this organization and another organization that helps them. Was it called Sele? They're all sort of at odds with each other and kind of doing underhanded things instead of finding a direct solution, which sadly feels like that checks out and what would happen if something bad were to happen or is happening currently. But yeah, so that's kind of like the basis of the show. So I kind of wanted to get that, just kind of have a rough explanation. Now, this is like the roughest possible explanation that I'm giving you.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit that's going on.
Into it much more and better said than I ever could. I would recommend, looking up some behind the scenes or explained.
Or just go watch it.
Or watch it, yeah. But I like the show and these movies because they have a lot of layers, like I mentioned, and you do find yourself kind of revisiting and looking for more and more details and sort of uncovering more and more secrets.
There's always something I find that I miss, and I've seen the series probably like a dozen times.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit. We're going to kind of skip over, talking about the director and the actors. It's a little bit of a different format, I think, this time around. But do you want to talk a little bit about like some of your favorite scenes?
Well, I guess just in general, the scene, you could say what drew me in, especially as a kid, was just the aesthetic of it. Like, I thought I was going to get something kind of like Gundam, but when you see I'm doing air quotes, the mechs, they look like humans. They're anatomically correct. They don't look like robots.
Yeah.
And the more the series goes on in the movie, I feel like we're just talking about the series now.
Well, I mean, it happens in the movie too.
Yeah. Yeah, you find out that, there's like hardly anything robotic about these other than we hooked up our like control systems to their brain. These are like giant living creatures. Yeah,
there's a couple reveals in the movie. I think you see a hand or two that's flesh colored.
Yeah, I think. Well, look, we can get into the movie. The first fight scene, Ava Unit 1 has its hand broken, but then it repairs it. But when it does, it kind of like repairs through the armor, and it's just like a regular human-looking hand.
Yeah, that was a big reveal in the show, where you notice hands, and then later I think we even get to see a face. Yeah. And you realize, these aren't really robots. They're basically humanoids, giant humanoids. So it's kind of like Attack on Titan in that way, I guess, a little bit. But, it's just, that's one of the mysteries that you uncover as you watch it. And basically the pilots have to get into this, into their suits. They have these little things on their heads that sync them to the creature. And then they have to get inside of a little pod and
that's pretty much put inside of their spine.
Yeah. So they basically take over the brain of the creature. So that's what Shinji and the other characters do. And in the movie kind of starts off like the show, where Shinji's very estranged from his father, and then he comes back into town because his father requests him, and his father's like, okay, get in that robot and fight.
His dad needs him just to pilot these Avas. He doesn't care that it's his son. He hadn't seen him in 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing. He's like, well, go out there and fight this thing. You might die.
Yeah,
but
and
don't.
He's kind of like, what is my motivation to do that? And to kind of spurn him on into doing it, he's like, if you don't have to do it, Rey has to. And Rey is heavily injured, but ready and willing to immediately put her life on the line. And that happens like a few times in the show and in the movie, where he sees the way that she is so self-sacrificing. Yeah. And it helps him, make that same decision. To pilot the Ava. He realizes that more is at stake. I feel like he's so lonely and disconnected from humanity because his father abandoned him that he he just doesn't see like why he should do that. But as he creates more and more connections in the show with other people, he realizes how important it is, and it makes him more courageous. Also, that's another big upside to the movie versus the show. He's a lot more courageous, I think, in the movie. He has more character growth quicker in the film than he does in the show.
Yeah, I think he pretty much first pilots it because he wants respect from his father. But then the more he's in the Avas, he realizes he's protecting this whole city.
Mm-hmm.
He starts to make friends. And he's like, oh, I'm doing this for everyone.
Yeah.
And so goes from a selfish reason to a selfless reason.
Yeah, but I kind of like the parallel with, when he meets like Masato, who's another one of my favorite characters, who's the lieutenant colonel commander, lieutenant.
She's pretty much in charge of that department.
Yeah.
The pilots, not necessarily the Avas, but the pilots.
I think I think the Ava's too, like tactical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think another character, Ritsuko, is more in control of the actual Avas.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And Masato ends up being his caretaker. She doesn't have to be, but she realizes that he's going to live alone and he's 14. And so she kind of takes him under her wing. And they have a lot in common because she had a difficult relationship with her father, which they don't really touch on as much in the movies as they do in the show. But
I think they touch on it in the second movie, but it's more of just a conversation Shinji has with
Ritsuko?
No.
Fuyutsuki?
No.
Kaji?
Kaji.
Okay. Okay. That I already have to watch it again, I guess. But yeah, so it's touched on more in the show, but they have that in common. I think she sees herself in Shinji, and also because her family, her father is no longer with, both her parents aren't. I think she has some kind of like somewhat motherly instincts towards Shinji, and she wants to help him, and she's a very empathetic character towards him throughout
Shinji's
the movies.
Father Gendo is garbage, but I feel like Misato feels like she wishes she could have patched things up with her dad before he died, so she's trying to help Shinji do that. But...
Yeah, that's a good point. And so he has some stronger connections, but there is sort of like a parallel of like people have different motivations than just saving the world. Even though the world is basically ending in these movies, in the show, a lot of what drives people to do the things that they do are their connections. It is like approval from your father, or fixing issues with your mother, or things like that. Okay, so those are a couple of things that I really like. What's another scene that you liked?
Well, I think, I know we've said this before, but I do like how this Ano was not scared to make the first movie the first several episodes of the series. That could have been catastrophic, and they would have just not made the movie. They'd be like, we've already seen this.
Yeah, that's true.
But the way he did it, there was enough familiarity. But he changed a lot of the scenes to where, like, the design of the angels were the same, but then they were so much more modern.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I think the second angel he fights, which is actually the fourth angel.
In this series?
The fourth angel, but it's the second one he fights.
Oh, okay.
It has a lot more detail. Like, it has these really creepy looking, like, crustacean legs on it that I don't think the original one had. I think the original one just had these glowing, like, tentacles, but this is, like, more creepy looking.
Yeah, I think a lot of the original angels, they were very basic in design.
Yeah. But
and they have more CG now.
So.
Yeah.
And the CG used in it is great because it's not CG. It's like they put like a layer of cell shading over it to where it looks exactly like the rest of the animation. It's like very well done.
Yeah.
And not overly done.
Yeah, I think a lot of the fight scenes, I always loved the fight scenes in the show, which I don't always say that, but the battles with the angels are fun to look at. They're always very different from each other. There's a lot of carnage, honestly.
Yeah, every angel looks like crazy different from the last.
Yeah, and like the build up and the fight with them is always kind of exciting. They always like barely win, and it's fun to watch. But I feel like they improved them even more in the movies. They just had more of a budget. Although I did read that that's like we read that it was like not true that they had limited budget.
See,
but I don't know. It seems like it
both.
because
I've heard like there's budget issues. there was an issue with the cost of red ink or red paint. That's why I think in the movies there's so much more red.
Mm-hmm.
In the show, everything was just kind of yellow.
Yeah. Or orange.
Or orange, yeah.
Yeah. But, so yeah, I agree with that. I feel like they had a lot of ideas that they would kind of have to imply, and then in this movie they were able to kind of flesh out. What are some of the big changes that happened that you like and you think are an improvement?
Well, there's not a lot of changes in this one. One key difference, you kind of have to go towards the end of the movie. But okay, so let's say the movie takes place in like a span of the 6 to 7 episodes.
Yeah.
But one of the last scenes, you see that Seilei's base is on the moon.
Yeah, that's true. That's a big reveal.
Which is only referenced, and I think there's one scene of Gendo in a ship going up there. But the cool thing is this, we see that Seilei is on the moon, and we get a glimpse of Kaoru.
Yeah, which you don't see him. I mean, he's the 13th angel, so you don't see him till
episode 20, I think.
Yeah, till towards the end of the show.
Yeah.
But in this one, he shows up in the first movie, but towards the end.
It's pretty much
you get a glimpse of him. Yeah.
But you get so much more in that clip, that like quick scene cliffhanger, than you did in the entire series. Like, you see him pretty much, I feel like he's just been awoken.
Yeah.
He's out of like this weird pod looking thing, but if you look next to him, there's a row of closed pods, but then there's also like 2 already open ones. That's not explained.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I do like that change. Only the other reason why I like that change is because Kaoru was one of my favorite characters, and he's not in it enough.
He plays such a bigger part in the movie than he did in the show, and I feel like Ano realized Kaoru was kind of wasted in the show. Like, he's introduced and then, spoiler, killed off like the next episode.
Yeah, yeah.
Like in this one, he's pretty much woven throughout all the movies pretty well.
Yeah.
Like a more fleshed out version of Kaoru.
I think another change that I like is the bond between Shinji, Kensuke, and Toji happens a little faster than in the show.
Yeah, it's a little different, but pretty similar. I think you get the first scene where Toji's mad because Shinji poorly pilots Unit 1 for the first time, and his little sister gets injured.
Yeah.
And so he beats him up. But then whenever he's fighting the 4th angel, his second encounter, he directly saves Kensuke and Toji, and they pretty much were like, oh wow, this is intense. We didn't realize you were doing all this.
Yeah.
And like Shinji almost dies in front of them, and it's crazy. But then after that, they respect him, and they're like become his best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of I want to say more of a organic friendship that he makes, that he, like we're talking earlier, which keeps him fighting in the Eva. Like, his relationship with Misato is kind of forced. Yeah, because a little bit. It's his boss. But these are his first friends in who knows how long. Yeah. Like, true friends.
Right. And they all go to the same school, so I guess another good thing to mention would be that, like, they're in Neo Tokyo, right? And
Tokyo 3.
Tokyo 3. Sorry, yeah, I'm thinking of Akira. But yeah, it's been destroyed a couple times. And basically everyone that's living in this city, well, these Evangelions are like, or not Evangelions, the angels are like drawn to this city. So like, and a lot of people have died. So like almost everybody's doesn't live there anymore. There's a few core people that still live in that city, and a lot of them work for Nerve. But I think there's kind of like a two things going on where it's like, on the one hand, people are trying to rebuild Tokyo, and then on the other hand, they're trying to protect it.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes up in the show too, of like, you know, the fact that things are getting worse and worse, and people are thinking about mass exiting, and that puts a lot of pressure on Shinji too, that, you know, he's supposed to protect the city so this doesn't happen, and every time there's an incident, more people want to leave. Well, the school that he goes to, The kids don't know, he doesn't know, but basically that school's kind of artificially there.
Well, if you notice, there's no upper or lower classmates.
Yeah, it's just them, and they're all the same age, pretty much.
It's implied in the show. They don't really say much about it in the movies, I think, because that isn't necessarily important to the movie plot. But in the show plot, they're all potential Ava pilot candidates.
Yeah, they're all potentials in air quotes, but then Ritsuko is, I think she's the one that picks them.
Yeah.
And she knows who she's picking. And they're, spoiler alert, they all have like a reason that they're picked. It's not like chance.
They were all born right after Second Impact.
Yeah.
They've all lost all, if not most of their parents.
Yeah.
And family. So it's either just them or maybe one parent.
And somehow, a little bit of a spoiler, somehow their parents are connected to that impact. Like, it's not just that they're orphans, it's that they're orphans that worked for the organization that ended up being Nerve. So there's like a bigger connection there than you'd think. And yeah, so, you know, if you watch the whole show, you know that. If you watch the movie, it's sort of implied, but not really touched on as much.
They take a lot of it out.
And it's really not that important, kind of like you said, because you know how like in Harry Potter towards the end they don't go back to school?
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of like that, where it's like there are several episodes about the school and about how they pick the, you know, pilots, but really ultimately it doesn't matter because there's a few that are predetermined to be pilots and they're the only ones that really end up having a part to play anyway.
Yeah, there's some stuff we can get into, but that would be if and when we cover the second movie.
Yeah, I would love to. I think that one will actually even be more fun. This is sort of like to whet your palate for the second one.
Yeah, plus the second movie is where you get a really new, like, bit of material.
Yeah, and I really like the way it veers off from the original plot a lot. Even though I love the original plot.
Kind of like what we're saying, though, about the students are potential pilots in the show. It's not so much in the movie... because in the there's a part in the second movie that takes place in the show, but it's very different because Toji is picked as one of the pilots.
Oh yeah.
But in the movies, they don't really even hint at that.
Yeah, that's true. He's never chosen. There's someone else that ends up getting kind of sacrificed, and I think that person makes a little more sense.
It does. That's like it was a good episode. In the show, because Toji gets picked, Kensuke really wanted to be picked.
Yeah, he's like the kid that's obsessed with war and sees a lot of honor in it, and he's like, I don't know, brainwashed by propaganda, like he wants to be in the thick of it. But when they get to know Shinji better, they realize how bad it is, and I think they lose their desire to pilot the Avas. And I do think that's sort of like a commentary on war, because I think the whole thing is very anti-war, you know, not necessarily anti-military, but anti-war. And I think that's part of Kensuke's character growth. He doesn't have quite the same character growth in this one. It's a little different, but it's like they realize through seeing what Shinji goes through that it's easy to like stand back and comment negatively on somebody's, you know, performance, but when you're with them you realize, hey, he's just like us. He's a 14-year-old child. He doesn't have a choice. He didn't even want to be here, and yet he's being forced to do this. Which I think is kind of cool about the show. That plus the destruction that you see in the city, you see a lot of it, and it's not played for just like, oh wow, this is fun to watch buildings explode. It really feels, you feel like the weight of those decisions. You know, Toji's sister gets injured because of Shinji, so like you get that gravity right away that I think you don't get necessarily in a lot of mech shows. Yeah,
and like we were saying, when Shinji saves Kensuke and Toji from the Fourth Angel, they realize what he's dealing with because they want to see it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, we want to get in on that.
Kensuke always has his camera on, he's always filming stuff. And so they go up there, they pretty much leave the little shelter, and the battle's like right there. Like AV Unit 1 gets tossed and almost crushes them.
Yeah.
And the Fourth Angel comes and starts attacking Shinji, and they're like, why isn't he fighting? And they realize he's not fighting because they're right there.
Yeah, he doesn't want to hurt his classmates.
They will die. And so pretty much Misato sees this happening on camera, and she's like, the only way this is gonna work is if Shinji squishes them,
Yeah.
or they get in the Eva with him. So they climb up in there, and they get to firsthand see like what he's dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the fact that he's willing to die
Yeah.
to save them. Like,
Yeah.
with them just sitting there. He wasn't gonna risk hurting them.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, like as the movie goes on, you kind of learn quicker. I mean, you kind of know a little bit in the beginning, but I think, like in this movie especially, that when they hurt the Eva, when the angels hurt the Eva, it hurts the pilot.
Yeah.
They experience pain and distress. It might not necessarily be permanent, but it's
Well,
yeah, it depends. But a lot of times, you know, they're like Shinji gets stabbed through, or the Ava
Yeah.
does, and he grabs his stomach, but he's not actually being stabbed.
yeah.
You know. Now, if the angel actually stabs through the little pod that he's in,
Yeah, he's screwed.
he'll be screwed. But that's another aspect to it that, I mean, that's why, you know, growing up when I was watching it, my mom would walk in and go, "The show is just screaming, like agonizing screaming," and I was like,
Mom.
"Yeah, it is." But so that's another interesting, I think, aspect. I mean, if you watch Pacific Rim, you know, they kind of borrowed some of that from this, but it's a little more complicated, I think, in this show than it is in that movie. But yeah, there's a lot of cool sci-fi stuff that I really enjoy in this, like the, you know, breathing the liquid oxygen,
Yeah.
and having that sort of not symbiotic but
It's a link.
connection,
It's like a neural
That's
link.
right, neural link to the Avas also. So, you know, it just makes it more exciting to watch, because I mean, sometimes in a mech show, you know, they're fighting and it's like, I mean, there's stakes, but with this it's like instant, you know, pain if
Yeah.
they get hurt. So it's like exciting to watch. That sounded dark, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's a little Ender's
It's fun to
Game-ish
watch these
too.
children's pain.
Yeah, and it's a little bit Ender's Game-ish, the fact that, you know,
They have to
they
be
have to do
children.
it. It has to be children,
Yeah.
which is sort of explained in the show, not entirely, but, you know, touched on enough.
Well, that kind of covered Shinji's first and second fight.
Yeah.
His third fight was really cool because that is where we get to learn a lot more about Rei.
Yeah, so we met Rei in the beginning, and you know right away looking at her, you're like, there's something off about this girl. She's got red eyes and blue hair, and she
And this
seems
isn't
to
an
be...
anime where everyone has that. So
Right.
she looks odd.
Yeah.
Everyone else just has like black or brown or blonde hair.
Yeah.
Or like brown.
I guess
blue.
Misato's is like kind of purplish, but it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to tell. But yeah, everyone looks standard or whatever, and she stands out. Plus, she acts like a robot, which is probably why I like her so much, because I love robot characters. But she's very... whereas Shinji is alone, she's even more alone. There's no history on this girl. We don't know where she came from in the beginning. And she seems to not have a lot of emotions. Like, when Shinji goes to give her new pass, which also happens in the show, he stumbles into her apartment, and first of all there's bloody bandages everywhere because she's been injured in the Ava during a test phase. And I think this is after we learned that she was in Ava Unit 0. It like went berserk, which is something that they can do, and that's when they like lose control of
Pretty
them.
much when the link is lost and the Ava's just taken
Rebelling.
over its own body.
Yeah, and it almost killed Rei, and then in a uncharacteristic feat of heroism, Gendo saved Rei. He opened a hatch, burned his hands really bad, and I think this causes Rei to sort of kind of fall in love with him, or at least idolize him after that, and be even more determined to fight for him. But we get little hints of, like, you know, Shinji goes to room, there's bandages everywhere, all the lights are off, it's kind of in disarray. And again, like, she doesn't seem to have any connections to people.
The only connection is in what you're saying when Gendo saved her. I mean, it burned the shit out of his hands, and his glasses fell off and broke.
They like melted almost.
But
They
she
cracked,
kept them, and so that's like the only thing she has that isn't like a necessity.
Yeah, because like she doesn't seem to have any, you know, she doesn't do anything in her free time. She doesn't focus on anything but getting in the Ava. Oh yeah, she reads books. That's true.
I guess the glasses, we could go into something, but I don't think we should yet,
Okay.
because we need to introduce more of the characters.
Okay.
But yeah, the glasses do play a big, not a big part, but like I
Yeah.
said, it's a connection Rey has to someone. It's like a keepsake.
Yeah. And Shinji is kind of like in this weird place of where he's kind of jealous of the attention his father gives her.
It's more positive. Like they have
Yeah.
chats, like just talking, not just
He
like
makes her smile.
yeah.
Yeah. But then he's also sort of attracted to her because they're kids, and, you know, there's actually another disturbing reason he's attracted to her. But yeah, so, you know, you were going to talk about that fight, though, that he was
Yeah,
in.
so pretty much we get to see a little bit about Rey, and then so pretty much the next angel that shows up. Like I was saying, they're vastly different. The first one was kind of humanoid. The second one looked like a weird sea creature that can fly, and now this one's just a big Rubik's cube, pretty much. It's just
Yeah.
a big blue square.
I think I always like that about the angels is it's so outside of the box of what
They
a
don't-
monster could look like, you
Yeah.
know? Like there's no rules.
And they all have very different like abilities.
Yeah.
So-
The only thing that you have to know about each and every one of them is they all have like a core.
There's a core, which is
And
essentially a soul.
Yeah. And they have something called an AT field, which is like a shield that they can put up
Yeah.
that the Avas have to penetrate to get to their core. Anyway, go ahead.
But so Shinji fights off the last angel, and there's like a day or two. There's always like 1 or 2 days, and then another one shows up. So
yeah.
this blue
It's
guy
happening rapidly.
shows up,
Blue guy.
and what he decides to do is just kind of hover directly over Nerve HQ,
Oh yeah.
which is really deep underground because we never even mentioned the geofront, which is really cool. It's like this big underground base
Yeah.
that looks like a paradise.
Yeah.
But so this guy, he just starts drilling down very slowly. They say it's going to take like
10 hours,
10
I
hours or
think?
something
Yeah.
like that. And so they're like, okay, let's go fight him. And when they do that, he shoots off this blast that can like melt everything.
Yeah.
Like mountains are gone.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh shit, we need to take them out, but from far away.
And the government and Sele is putting pressure on them like, well, just blow the whole thing up. Where obviously this angel's going to get down to Adam and we got to
Yeah.
blow everything up.
But he's still above the city that is still somewhat populated.
Yeah.
Or at least they're all in shelters, but people kind of need to go back into the city.
And Katsuragi's like, that's a huge waste. Like all their, you know, research and the things that they've built to just you know, destroy all of it.
Yeah.
She's like, let's think outside the box. How can we, you know, defeat this creature and save everybody?
So pretty much Misato's big thing is she always comes up with the most ridiculous, most unlikely plans to work, and they always work.
Yeah.
But so they get this bonkers large, like essentially a sniper rifle that
Yeah.
shoots just energy. And so they're like, okay, well, get this thing. We're literally going to power down all of Japan just to power
Yeah.
this thing.
Which is weird. Now it kind of feels like when we have like rolling blackouts
Yeah.
and stuff, but they
It's like, what are
they
we
just make an announcement. They're like, "Thank you for your service, but
No
we're gonna
power
have
tonight."
to no power tonight after this time." Like almost no warning.
So there's this big build up, this big like military like prep and everything. And you find out that this is the first mission that Shinji and Rei are both going to be on.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, Shinji, you're going to be the gunner, and Rei has this big shield to hopefully protect them from this blast that can like flatten mountains.
But I love that Shinji is like, "I don't want to do it. We could die." And Rei goes, "Okay, stay here and go to sleep." And
She's
she
like-
just leaves.
Yeah, she's like, I'll do it.
and he's like, "Okay, never mind. I'm coming."
Here I am. And so pretty much there's really good, like this angel, like I was saying, the way they changed some of the graphics, not graphics, but the way they changed it, this was like really cool. Like in the original show, I think it just stayed a cube the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, it like does all kinds of crazy, like morphs into other shapes and like spikes, and it's like screaming. It's like
Yeah.
really cool the way they did it. And so they do their plan. Shinji shoots it, and they think they got it, but then it like reforms and it shoots a blast at
Yeah.
them. And pretty much the last minute, Rei pops up with her giant Ava shield,
Yeah.
while the big sniper rifle energy gun is charging up. So she's melting. Shinji manages to get the shot. They kill it. And Shinji runs over to Rei's entry plug, burns his hands.
Yeah.
Very similar to
Gendo.
And he comes in there and asks if she's okay.
Yeah. And then he tells her something like, don't say that it doesn't matter if you die.
Yeah. She's like, oh, he said something like, before mission, don't say goodbye.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool. So now we got to see him. The first time he fought was for the city.
Yeah.
The second time was for friends.
Yeah.
And then the third time was more for like, I'm trying to think how I would describe it. Like self-worth almost.
Yeah. Or I mean for Rei, really.
Yeah. He didn't want her to.
He doesn't want her to go it alone.
He
you know?
felt like he's realizing he wants a purpose, so he kind of wants her to have a purpose.
Yeah, to find meaning in life.
And I feel like
guess.
he never really thought of it when she said, I'll do it myself. If I die, I die. He's like, oh, that's not a good way to think of it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the way he's been thinking of everything.
Right. Yeah, because he's I think that's another big theme in the show and in the movies is like depression.
Yeah.
And I think when I was younger, I wasn't able to understand that that's what Shinji's going through. It makes sense. The world is ending. Things are shitty. He's depressed.
He's only 14. He can't really comprehend a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and so he reacts very differently to what's happening than some of the other characters, but it's not any less realistic. In fact, he's probably like the most normal character in the show. And I think that that's kind of what draws the other characters to him is that he's got this innocence to him, you know, like that they don't have.
Forever, like, since the show came out in the 90s, everyone just says he's a wimp, he's a terrible character. But it's like, when you really think of it, it's like, no, he's probably one of the best characters. Like, you do all the stuff he did.
Yeah,
and not
it's
just
like
cry every night and scream all the time.
Yeah, and I mean the other characters, like, yeah, Rei's not afraid, but there's a reason, you know, and even when we meet Asuka, there's a reason as well, you know. So it's like they're sort of broken characters that aren't all the way. I don't know. They don't have the luxury of being able to feel how bad things really are, but Shinji does. He's like probably the most quote unquote normal character.
Think about when stuff was kind of good still.
Yeah.
He remembers some good things.
Do we meet Asuka in this movie or not yet?
No. She shows up
in the second one.
The very beginning of the second movie.
Oh, that's right. Okay. We watched all these back to back, so it's kind of hard.
Which in the show she shows up, I think, in episode 8.
That's true.
Which is pretty on point for this because the movie takes place
like 1 to 6.
1 to 6, half a 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
It starts kind of where it left off in the show. But then after that is where it starts getting wildly different, which I think is, I'm not going to say for the best because I think the show is still good, but it's definitely a great movie series.
Yeah. I think, you know, we watched some behind the scenes stuff where Anno made some comments about the character Rei, that he was like extremely invested in the character up until basically this point.
This fight, yeah.
And then he kind of lost interest in her and sort of was fleshing out the other characters instead. And I think maybe that's part of why some people, you know, oh my God, this is like the beginning of like the waifu wars where people team Asuka, team Rei. But I was always team Rei because, and I just wanted to say that I think she's a complex character because she's kind of like, you know, like Data or something, you know, where she's like trying to figure out who she is, her humanity, and all that kind of stuff. She's going through that throughout the show.
We can touch on it when we get into the second one, but she always starts to evolve and learn up until a certain point. Yeah. And we'll cover that next time.
Yeah, we'll cover that next time. But there's a reason why she's so disconnected and why she's so confused and why I don't think it's one of those like Born Sexy Yesterday tropes where it's like, you know, that's so that she's hot or something. The way that her character is written, it does have a big part to play in, especially in the beginning of the show, and I think especially at the end of the show too. Yeah. And these movies do a better job of making you more interested in her throughout too.
They keep her pretty more upfront.
Yeah.
She doesn't literally go away for like 10 episodes.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell in the show that they're like more interested in Asuka, but
I always liked
I'm glad
Rey
that
more than Asuka, but Unit 2 was my favorite Ava.
I used to not like Asuka when I was a teenager. I thought she was mean, and I didn't like her. She is mean, but I realized that she's like a really complex, tortured character now, and so I like her more. Oh, go ahead.
We can talk more about her in the second
we'll
movie,
we'll wait to talk about that.
She's not in this one. She's not introduced.
And it's hard not to talk about Rey too much without giving things away about her either. But I like that was one of the things that I really liked about this show. There's a lot of strong female characters. Now they're not perfect, they're flawed, but they're
Everyone's
interesting.
Flawed, but that's more realistic.
Agreed. Yeah, like I said, Masato. You know, when I was younger, I was like, she's a drunk. I don't know.
Wouldn't you be if
the whole
world was like you don't know if it's gonna explode tomorrow?
And she's got this complicated history with her parents, with ex-lovers, and just there's a lot going on in her life, and yet she's so optimistic
the world.
About the future.
She can.
Yeah, she really believes she can, and for her to be like a colonel, to be such an important character in the context of the show, honestly was unique back then. And then Ritsuko too. I won't say I love her. She's got some big flaws.
Is so much not better, but she has so much more
to do
character. In the show, but I feel like the way the movies go, they didn't really need that character as much, so we kind of lose some of that character development.
True.
But she had a very rough story, but it's like 2 really good episodes.
Yeah, since it's not in the movies, you can say if you want.
Well, that kind of gives away spoilers about Rey.
Oh, okay. Let's leave it at that then. Ritsuko, I think by kind of taking out some of the more, I'm going to say it, maybe a little problematic aspects of her character. There's an issue with the show of everyone being a little too obsessed with Gendo. Let's say that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of its time. Now, it does make for some interesting twists and turns in the story for sure.
Yeah.
Because Gendo has this habit of literally, male or female, using everyone. And when it's women, he tends to use them sexually to get what he wants. And I think that they kind of took some of that out of Ritsuko's character, and she becomes more heroic, I think, in this one. Because I think that's still there, but it's minimized a little bit more.
I think it's mentioned.
Yeah, it's more centered on her mother that we learn about later.
Yeah. Which, that's what I wanted to talk about. I guess we could talk about that without delving too much into Rey spoilers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But it's mentioned, and you see that they hint that an AI program that calculates probabilities, and that's where they get a lot of their, are we going to beat this angel or not? And it's called the Magi, which are based on the 3 wise men. They're 3 supercomputers that compute stuff differently, and they pretty much talk to each other and figure stuff out. What we don't get in the movies, but we get in the show, is that the Magi are all human brains. They're not computers.
Yeah.
They're human brains that talk to each other and come up with the most likely formulaic solution to the problem.
And they're female human brains.
Yeah.
They're cloned brains of one woman.
Ritsuko's mother.
Yeah. And so she becomes
all different
aspects of her personality.
Different personalities of one person.
I guess it's kind of like, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
It's the mother, the scientist, and the woman, which, I mean, in real life, I don't think those are that separate, but for the context of the show, yeah.
But yeah, that was really cool. I think it was it might have been 1 episode. But, I mean, they mentioned the Magi computer a few times, but they don't go into what it is.
They just don't have time.
Yeah,
but it was one of my favorite reveals when you see the brains.
They have
I was
to hack into it, and
what?
They literally cut this plate off, and there's a brain inside of it.
That blew my mind as a kid, because I think this was my first experience with I guess biomechanical stuff. You know, this is before I saw Cronenberg and
well, it's
even before the Matrix had come out.
Biomechanical stuff. There's a lot of body horror in it.
Yeah, it's like a lot of horror, like
Yeah.
genuine horror, and it's fun. And I think the like religious imagery stuff too is really interesting too.
Yeah, whenever an angel dies, I feel like the System of a Down. Whenever they die, like a explosion happens, but it's like cross-shaped.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think Ano actually just said he thought it was cool. But,
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just.
but he's like, angels from heaven, when they die, a cross appears. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
But make sure it's an explosion.
Yeah.
But it definitely makes for, like, really cool aesthetics, especially at the end of the battle.
Yeah, and I just think it was, again, my first, I guess, like, window into that stuff. This is way before I had read any sci-fi novels. I was a kid, so,
Yeah.
like, I think a lot of the stuff that they have in here, it's not necessarily 100% original, but I feel like it draws heavily more from hard sci-fi than a lot of other stuff does.
Oh, yeah, there's a ton of technical jargon being spoken in the background a lot, and they're always talking about the different, like, layers on the neuronet to keep the Avas in check and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of hard sci-fi.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, the pilots have to, like, sync with their Avas, and if the sync's, like, broken or compromised, they could die. You know, there's a lot of, like, complex stuff
Ava
that happens.
Absorb it into themselves.
Yeah, that's a thing that can happen.
Yep.
We'll talk about that another time. Yeah, but yeah, it's tough because this is the first one. There's so much I want to say that I can't say yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, our love for the franchise kind of comes across, and hopefully, this was coherent and not just ramblings
I might
from
give
me.
out a spoiler for your show, but we might do these 4 movies, and then maybe we'll do each episode.
Yeah, I could do that on the Patreon.
You could break them down.
Yeah, or maybe do like a couple episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
That'd be cool.
So yeah, this is why we really like this movie and the show. I think this movie is great. It's a pretty good way to kind of dip your toe into this universe. Now, it is a little overwhelming information-wise. There's a lot of info dump. If you watch anime, you know that they love exposition, and they give you a lot of it, maybe too much. But if that's your thing, it's my thing, I think you'll enjoy it.
But it being a movie,
yeah,
a lot of it is stripped out.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
stripped down to where it can fit in a 2-hour movie instead of a 26-episode series.
Yeah, although I wonder what it's like to have never seen the show and to get that info dump into 2 hours. But actually, tell me, if you listen to this and it makes you interested and you watch it, tell me. And if you have a question, ask me. I might know the answer.
Yeah, there is some stuff that they left in the movies that is explained in the show, but they don't explain it, because I feel like Anna's like, yeah, I want new viewers, but this is for the fans.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted them to see back in the 90s.
Let me just say, the answers that you do get are kind of iffy. I mean, a lot of it is like us filling in the blanks because he could never really make up his mind as to what was happening.
And I think he's known for doing that, he always likes open-ended endings.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is a lot. It is, a lot of information and a lot of imagery and symbolism and stuff. But if you enjoy that, I think you'll really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess this brings me to my last couple of questions. Did we miss anything before I keep going?
Oh, it's Ava, so probably, but I'm sure we can do like 8 more episodes on this.
I know.
alone.
I was worried about making this like 3 hours long. So let me just say,
Well, if we're talking about the show,
yeah, we'd be here all night.
Yeah.
We don't have
cover
the
the
time.
first 6 episodes, which is the first movie.
Yeah. Why do you think you've seen this? Why do you think you've seen that show so many times, and why do you keep buying these movies and new iterations?
I'm actually collecting the Japanese only collector's editions right now because I'm a weirdo and I like
humble
this
brag.
show. But no, it's like I feel like we were talking about this the other night. Whenever I saw this, I was probably right at the age of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like super into the show. I'm like, man, this is so cool. They're kids like me, but they're saving the world. There's so much going on. It's not just for being...
It's very existential. Like the crisis that the characters are experiencing. It's not just physically the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's like mentally the distress of dealing with the end of the
Yeah.
It was complicated. I like that. Especially when you're a teenager, you have
That's kind of what you think all the time.
you're like emo, like I was an emotional kid and I was going through a lot, and these characters were going through a lot. Now, the stakes were a little higher. It was the end of the world, but I appreciated that about it.
Yeah, I feel like I might have been too young, I don't know, but I feel like I was right at the perfect age to see this, to where I could put myself into the show a little more. And even as I got older, it just stuck with me. It's always been my favorite show. There's so many other animes I watched dozens of times also, but this one is my favorite. This is the first one I owned the full series. Whenever I heard they were going to start doing these movies, I was skeptical at first, but then I saw this one. I'm like, oh, it's the show, but more fleshed out.
Yeah, I would say it's like a more mature version of the show, really.
Yeah,
like,
I feel like
this
he
is
made
him
it
as a
for-
writer. He got better. And
Yeah, like
it's better for it.
The young teenagers that watched this in the 90s, he made it for the 30-year-olds watching it now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like you said, maybe it was a little too adult. I mean, there's a lot about it that's a little too adult, but it probably was. But I think it touched on some things that teenagers are dealing with in terms of their emotions, even sex. Honestly, like
because
you're
14-year-olds think about.
Yeah, you're going through puberty and just all the things that teenagers are going through, and then on top of that, this really high stakes and taking their emotions like seriously.
Yeah.
I think that really drew me in. And then I mentioned it earlier, I think the female characters are really compelling. There's more of them than male characters, actually. But it's funny that over time this has kind of gotten a reputation of being like a toxic bro anime, and that is so upsetting to me because I really don't think that's true. There's definitely some over the top fan service.
Bros are like cool robots and blood.
Yeah,
which happens, but
that does happen.
A lot more behind all that.
I think there's a lot more underneath all that, and I think that sure, a lot of it is hypersexualized. That's anime, especially in the 90s. But I think that there's more to all those characters other than just being sexy.
Yeah.
And I think they have a huge part to play in the plot, and they're important. Yes, Shinji is the central character, but I said on Twitter, I think he's the template for a more empathetic, sensitive male lead, and I appreciate that.
Now.
Yeah, I think when this came out, I mean, like you said, everyone hated Shinji. They did not understand why he wasn't more manly and all this stuff. And now that we're kind of in 2021, it's like we can be like, okay, I get it now, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of toxic to claim that a 14-year-old little boy who's dealing with the end of the world can't cry about it.
And he's directly responsible for if we make it to the next day or not.
Yeah, and when he screws up, it's his fault. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said. So that's kind of why I enjoy it so much. And, how do you pitch this? How would you pitch this movie to someone that's never seen it before? You look nervous.
I'm so nervous. I'm sweating bullets. I think we touched on this earlier. I'd be like, it's a very unique take on sci-fi.
Yeah.
There's weird spiritual biblical stuff, but also pretty hard sci-fi technical jargon, like the way the actuator that moves the left arm to where it doesn't bend the wrong way and break type conversations going on.
That's true.
It's totally opposite ends of the spectrum, but it's blended together so perfectly. So if you want something that feels like sci-fi but not sci-fi at all, it's like if this was real, it would be like this. It's like, oh, there's these robotic creatures, but we also have these weird creatures from heaven coming down, so there's probably be a lot of people talking about faith and stuff all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
It's more of a like both sides are happening at once. It's not one or the other. It's like if you want a totally bonkers show that I think kind of would be pretty realistic, this is what you want to see.
Yeah, I think you know, the way it's plugged online a lot is that it's a very influential anime. It did go on to influence the way a lot of anime after that looked.
Yeah.
You kind of already mentioned the depth that it takes with its characters and stuff like that. It just basically changed the game. But yet nothing, I think, has ever been quite as unique and quite as good, honestly, as Ava was to me. In this specific anime genre, there's tons of good anime.
Oh, yeah.
But there's been other shows that have sort of tried to duplicate what they did, but I don't think they were as good. Yeah.
Be duplicated.
Yeah, and the influence that it had on pop culture in Japan and here goes a lot further than...
Well, there's still like Ava stores there.
Right. I'm looking at my shelf and I have like 1 million figures of Rey, so there's that. Does that make you want to watch it? But anyway, it's really good, and I suggest watching it. It's all on Amazon Prime right now, and I think that's why we kind
All
of...
4 movies.
Yeah, and the show too, right?
I don't know if they put the show
I
up.
think the show's on there too, but I could be wrong. I'll double check. But anyway, we thought this was good timing to go ahead and make this episode. Something we've been thinking about for a while. So we hope you enjoyed it. Nick, where can people find you?
They can find me pretty much on all the social medias under Wardco Props or something like that. I think one of them has an underscore. Okay. I'm bad at plugging myself. I don't know which
I'll
one's
put it
which.
in the show
but
notes.
if you just look up Wardco Props in Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, I should pop up.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on, and I'm so glad you love this as much as I do.
Thanks for having me on to talk about my favorite anime that has luckily been turned into 4 really amazing movies.
Yes.